My name is Wren Calloway, and I am 41 years old. And the first thing I did when I got into Paulette's car was put the folder on my lap and buckle my seatbelt, and not say a single word for the first 3 blocks. Paulette didn't say anything either. That's the thing about a person who has known you for 9 years. They understand which silences are grief and which silences are preparation, and she had seen enough of mine to know the difference. The folder was manila, standard issue, the kind I use at work for compliance reviews, and it contained 11 pages of documentation that I had assembled from a hospital bed over the preceding 6 weeks, including a county property record pull, a scanned copy of a notarized document I was not supposed to have seen yet, a handwritten log kept by the woman driving the car, and a 4-sentence email from my attorney confirming that he would meet us at the building at 11. I was still 22 pounds lighter than I had been on February 19th. My clothes fit wrong. There was a fading bruise on the inside of my left forearm where the IV lines had been, and I was going home. My brother had been living in my apartment for 6 weeks, and he didn't know that I already knew everything, and the folder on my lap was why. Before I tell you the rest of this, I need you to understand something about the document inside that folder. The one with the word lessee typed beside my brother's name and a notary stamp dated March 7th. Because that date is going to matter more than almost anything else in this story. And I didn't understand why until I was lying in a hospital bed on the 3rd floor of CAMC General with a drain tube in my side and more time to think than I had ever had in my entire adult life. If you want to know how it ends, stay with me. And if you've ever been the one in your family who manages, who absorbs, who quietly carries the thing no one else will pick up, I think you already know some version of how this story feels. If this is your first time here, please hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the rest. I post stories like this every week. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. Genuinely, I love knowing. And now let me take you back to the beginning. I grew up in Morgantown, West Virginia, in a house where my father worked rotating shifts at the glass plant, and my mother cleaned other people's houses until her knees gave out when she was 53. I am the older of 2 children by 6 years. My brother Denton was what my mother called her surprise, born in a window when things had very slightly improved, when my parents had stepped back from the edge far enough to exhale. He was not a mistake. He was a relief. And he was treated accordingly. I want to be precise about this because I don't want you to think I'm building a case against 2 people who are no longer here to respond. I'm not. I loved my parents. I understand why they did what they did. But understanding why something happened does not mean pretending it didn't. My father had a savings account he'd been building for years. Not much, but careful. And when Denton was 19 and needed a truck, a large portion of it went to Denton's truck. When my mother made her grandmother's quilts, the nicest one went to Denton's first girlfriend. When I was 14 and won a regional science competition and received a small cash prize, my mother asked me, quietly, gently, if I could put it toward Denton's Little League fees because it had been a hard month. I did. I never told anyone I'd won. That was the atmosphere. I was the one who didn't need anything. I had decided to be, which is different from actually being. But I had gotten so good at the performance that nobody checked the seams. I paid my own way through community college and then through West Virginia University on a partial scholarship and Pell Grants. I got a degree in health information management, which is a precise way of saying that I learned how paper trails work, where they hold, where they break, what a discrepancy looks like in a document and what it means when you find one. I got a job at a regional hospital network in Charleston, doing medical records compliance. I have been there for 12 years. I earn $58,000 a year, which is not a lot, and I have no debt beyond a car payment, which means it is actually quite a lot. 8 years ago, I bought an apartment. I paid it off in 6. I want you to hold that for a moment. A 1-bedroom apartment in a modest building in Charleston, West Virginia, owned outright, the deed in my name only, purchased with money I saved for 10 years while watching Denton cycle through 4 jobs and 2 business ideas, and one very expensive period of what the family called finding himself. The apartment was the only thing I had ever built entirely on my own. It was mine in a way nothing else in my life had ever been mine. My neighbor Paulette moved in below me 9 months after I bought it. We had coffee for the first time that February. I have not gone 3 weeks without talking to her since. She is 54 and Nigerian American and a retired school librarian and the most practically loving person I have ever met, which means she shows up without being asked and does the specific useful thing rather than the emotionally satisfying thing. And that distinction has saved me more than once. About 3 years ago, I made a decision I have thought about many times since. Denton was between places, which was, by then, a recurring condition, and he asked if he could have a spare key to my apartment, just in case. Emergency use, he said. He had that way of asking things where the request sounds so reasonable that saying no feels like the unreasonable act. I gave him the key. I want to tell you I hesitated. I didn't. That's the part that still sits with me. I didn't hesitate. There is one more thing from this period that I need to plant here, and I need you to file it away without understanding it yet, because it is going to become the most important detail in this entire story. When my father died, he left a watch, a plain gold tone watch, nothing expensive, the kind of thing a man from Morgantown who worked rotating shifts for 30 years would have bought himself as a single good thing. He left it in the drawer of his nightstand. He did not leave a note specifying who it was for. Denton picked it up at the estate and put it on his wrist that same afternoon and has worn it every day since. I didn't say anything. I never said anything. He was my brother. It was a watch. I let him have it. I let him have it. Remember that. On February 19th, I was taken by ambulance to CAMC General with a ruptured ovarian cyst that had caused internal bleeding significant enough that the surgical team spent 4 hours stopping it. I had 2 additional corrective procedures over the following 3 weeks. I was not in a condition to do anything except lie there and be tended to and slowly, incrementally, not die. Paulette brought me books. She stayed through the second surgery. She drove an hour each way 4 times in the first 2 weeks because that is who she is. And on day 21, she texted me from the lobby of our building with a message that I still have on my phone. He has bags, Wren. More than overnight bags. I read it lying on my back, IV in my arm, and I was quiet for a moment the way I had been trained my entire life to be quiet. That first reflexive instinct to absorb, to find the charitable explanation, to give him the benefit. And then something underneath that went very still and very cold and said, no. I did not call Denton. I called my attorney, Marcus Tillman, whose number I had from 2 previous minor building disputes, and I told him what Paulette had seen, and I asked him to pull the county property records on my unit and flag anything unusual. Marcus called me back in 40 minutes. He said, Wren, someone submitted a change of address form to the county assessor's office, listing this property under a different primary occupant. The submission date is March 14th. I was in the hospital on February 19th. That was 23 days. What you need to understand is that at that moment, in that bed, in that room that smelled like antiseptic and the slightly stale air of institutional heating, I stopped being tired. I had been tired for a long time, tired in the way that comes from years of absorbing without complaining, from building quietly while someone else got the credit for breathing. And then I wasn't. Marcus asked me what I wanted to do, and I told him exactly what I wanted to do. He said he'd be ready. What I didn't know yet, what I wouldn't understand for another week, was that the change of address filing was only the surface. The thing underneath it was the reason I was holding a manila folder in Paulette's passenger seat on the morning I was discharged, and the reason Marcus Tillman was already standing in the hallway of my building in his charcoal suit, checking his phone when we pulled into the parking lot. The silence inside a hospital is not peaceful. I need you to understand that, because when people imagine someone recovering from surgery, they imagine something restful. Dim light, soft sounds, healing. What it actually is, at least for me, at least for those 6 weeks, was a silence so full of everything I was not doing, everything that was happening without me, that it had a texture. I could feel it pressing. I could feel it in the way you feel a room that someone has just left. I was not peaceful. I was contained. There is a difference. On the days I felt well enough, I made lists on my phone, color-coded by category. Legal, financial, documentation, things to ask Marcus, things to ask Paulette. I had a section I labeled Denton's Timeline, and I updated it every time something new came in. Paulette sent me text updates every 2 to 3 days. Factual, specific, no editorializing, because she knew I needed facts and not comfort. March 2nd, heard his voice through the ceiling around 10 p.m. Sounded like a phone call, talked for a long time. March 9th, a woman was there today, left around 6. Denton came back around 9 with grocery bags. March 14th, his name is on a piece of mail addressed to your unit number. Return address is a credit card company. That last one was the same day as the change of address filing. I noted the coincidence and added it to the timeline. I also need to tell you about the calls. I did not call Denton during those 6 weeks, not once. I had nothing to say to him that would not tip my hand, and I was not willing to tip my hand until the documentation was complete. But other people called me. A cousin of ours, second cousin really, our mothers had been friendly, texted me in week 4 to say she hoped I was feeling better and that she thought it was really sweet that Denton is keeping an eye on things for you. I read that message 3 times. I typed back, "Thank you for thinking of me." I did not explain. A woman who had known my mother at church called me directly and said she hoped I was being fair to my brother, given everything he was going through, and that she was sure I knew family was all you had in the end. I listened to the entire call. I said, "I appreciate you calling." I hung up. I added a note to the Denton timeline section. Smear campaign active. At minimum, 2 secondary contacts reached out on his behalf. Narrative: Denton is helping. Wren should be grateful. If I'm being honest with you, and I want to be honest with you, because this is the part I'm least proud of, for about an hour after that second call, I sat with my phone on my chest, and I felt something I can only describe as a very old and very tired shame. Not guilt, shame. The shame of being the kind of person whose own family members have to be reminded to call you. The shame of knowing that if something had happened to Denton, if he had been the one in the hospital, I would have been there on day 1. I would not have needed to be talked into it. I was crying before I realized I was crying, and I was already angry before the tears stopped. That is the moment I understood something I had been circling for years. I was not going to wait to be believed. I had been waiting my entire life to be believed, and it had produced exactly nothing. I was going to produce documentation instead. I was already doing it. I just needed to finish. About a week and a half before my discharge, Paulette mentioned something during one of her update calls that she tucked into a larger sentence almost by accident. She said Denton seemed to be going out most mornings, sometimes dressed up, and that she'd noticed he was always wearing the same watch, gold-toned, a little battered, the kind their father used to wear. She said she wasn't sure why she kept noticing it. I knew why. I had been thinking about that watch since the first update. I didn't explain this to Paulette yet. I just said, keep noting it. She said she would. That same week, Marcus sent me a PDF. He had obtained, through a formal records request, a copy of not just the change of address form, but a secondary document that Denton had filed, a notarized instrument purporting to be a temporary lease agreement granting Denton occupancy of my unit, signed by Denton, witnessed by a woman named Macy, and stamped by a notary whose office Marcus had already flagged as having some questions around their procedures. I opened the PDF on my phone lying flat on my back, and I read it twice. The lease listed a monthly rent of $1 for a term of 2 years and included language, lifted almost verbatim from a legal website, about the lessee's right to maintain the premises in the owner's absence. He had written that. He had had it notarized. He had filed it. I put my phone down on my chest and I stared at the ceiling and I thought, he researched this. This was not panic. This was not opportunism. This was a plan. I texted Marcus. He researched adverse possession. The timeline is in the document dates. He started this before I went to the hospital. Marcus responded 4 minutes later. I know. I had the same thought. I have a filing ready when you want it. I texted back. Not yet. I want to be there. And then I asked the nurse what the current projected discharge date was. She said approximately 12 days. I said, okay. I asked if I could make a phone call. She said, of course. I did not call Marcus. I called Denton. The call lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds. My voice was calm in the way it is before a compliance review. Not performed calm, actual calm. The kind that comes from knowing exactly what you have in the folder. I told him I was being discharged and I'd need access to the apartment the following morning. He said, and this is almost perfect, he said, of course, I'll make sure the place is ready for you. I've been keeping things up. You don't have to worry about anything. He sounded so relieved to be helpful. He sounded like the brother he had always imagined himself to be. He did not know about the county filing. He did not know about Paulette's log. He did not know about the notarized document PDF on my phone. He did not know that Marcus Tillman had a petition for wrongful occupation and a formal fraud complaint ready to file the moment I authorized it. He did not know I had been building a file for 6 weeks from a hospital bed. I said, I know you will, Denton. I hung up. I lay there for a moment in the particular quiet of a hospital at 4 in the afternoon. Carts somewhere in the distance, someone's television through the wall, the faint hiss of the heating system. And I thought about the night my father died. The way Denton had picked up that watch from the nightstand and put it on his wrist, and how I had watched him do it and said nothing. I had been saying nothing for 35 years. I thought about what Marcus had said when I'd told him the whole story. Not just the apartment, but the history, the savings account, the truck, the way I had always been the one who didn't need anything. He had listened for a long time. Then he'd said, very quietly, "The documents will speak for themselves, but you have to show up to hand them over." I thought about that. Then I got up, slowly, holding the bed rail, and I walked to the window and I looked at the parking lot below and I thought, I need to find something to wear that buttons up because I am going to look like myself when I walk back into my home. And I want you to sit with this for a second because I need you to understand the specific feeling of this moment. My phone rang. I picked it up without looking. I thought it was Paulette. It was not Paulette. It was a number I didn't recognize, a local Charleston prefix. And when I answered it, the voice on the other end said, "Ms. Calloway? This is the county assessor's office returning a call about a record dispute on Elm Street. We have a note here that your attorney was in contact with us last week." And I said, "Yes." And I listened. And what they told me changed the scope of everything I thought I understood about what my brother had actually been planning and for how long. What the assessor's office told me, in the careful, bureaucratic language of someone who is reading from a screen and aware that what they are reading is somewhat extraordinary, was that the change of address filing, the one Denton had submitted on March 14th, was not the first contact their office had received regarding my property. There had been a prior inquiry submitted online on February 11th, 8 days before my hospitalization. The inquiry asked about the process for establishing primary residency in a property where the listed owner was abroad or incapacitated for an extended period. I had not been abroad. I had not been incapacitated on February 11th. On February 11th, I was at my desk at work, flagging a billing discrepancy in a patient's Medicare file. I had my coffee. I had my color-coded list. I was fine. My brother had been researching this 8 days before I went to the hospital. The ruptured cyst was not his opportunity. My hospitalization was not the thing that gave him the idea. He had the idea before I got sick, and my getting sick was, in his mind, a deadline moved forward. I sat with that information for a long time after the call ended. I sat with it the way you sit with something that confirms what you already suspected and is worse than you expected anyway. I was not surprised. I want to be honest about that. I was not surprised. But there is a specific pain in having the confirmation arrive anyway. It is the pain of having been right about someone and having wished for many years that you were wrong. I added the date to my timeline. I texted Marcus. I asked him if a prior online inquiry counted as documented intent. He said, "Combined with the subsequent filing, yes. This establishes premeditation. This is a significant development, Wren." I put my phone face down on the bed and looked at the ceiling for a while. I thought about the woman from my mother's church telling me family was all you had. I thought about the cousin texting that Denton was keeping an eye on things. I thought about my mother's hands, rough from cleaning other people's houses, always a little red at the knuckles, and the way she used to smooth the good quilt over Denton's bed like it was something he deserved, which was not a cruelty, just a habit of love that had learned to travel in one direction. I was going to stop being in the path of that direction. I was going to get my apartment back, and the record was going to be correct, and I was going to do both of those things without yelling. Because I don't yell, I document. The night before discharge, Paulette came and sat with me for 2 hours. We did not talk about the apartment for most of it. We talked about her son in Atlanta, who had just gotten a promotion, and about a book she was reading, and about whether the hospital cafeteria's soup was actually edible or just theoretically soup. She brought me a cardigan from my apartment, my green one, the one I wear on bad energy days, because she had been in my apartment picking up the mail I had officially authorized her to collect, the only person I had authorized, which was also on record. Before she left, she said, "Marcus texted me. He'll be there at 10:45. I said, "I know." She said, "How are you feeling?" I said, "Like a compliance review." She laughed. Then she hugged me very carefully around my still healing midsection, and she said into my shoulder, "You were right, and you waited, and you did it correctly, and I'm proud of you." And I held on to that for about 30 seconds, and then I said, "You kept the log." She said, "I kept every entry." I said, "Then we did it correctly." She left at 9. I sat in the dim room and I thought about what I was going to wear in the morning. Not because appearance was the point, because I needed something to control that wasn't the outcome, and choosing the right blouse was something I could control completely. I chose the cream one with the small buttons, the compliance review blouse. I put my mother's gold chain next to it on the bedside chair. The morning of discharge moved slowly and then all at once in the way of hospital mornings. Paperwork, a final check, the nurse going over discharge instructions in a voice that expected me to be only partly listening. I was fully listening. I thanked her. I signed everything. I took the folder from the bedside drawer where I had been keeping it, and I put it in my bag, and I put on the cream blouse and the dark navy trousers that fit slightly wrong at the waist because I had lost too much weight, and I clipped my mother's gold chain around my neck. Paulette was already in the lobby with the car pulled around. The drive back was 22 minutes. We stopped once for coffee from a gas station on the way because Paulette drinks the worst possible coffee with absolute conviction, and I find this comforting. I held the cup with both hands and watched the road and did not think about Denton specifically. I thought about the documents. I thought about the order in which I was going to place them on the counter. I had decided on 3. The change of address form first, then the notarized lease, then Paulette's log. The assessor's inquiry record Marcus was going to hold in his briefcase for if we needed it. I hoped we would not need it. I thought we probably would not. The change of address form alone, with that date on it, was already the whole story. Marcus was standing in the hallway outside my apartment when we stepped off the elevator. He had been there, he told me later, for 12 minutes. He was in his charcoal suit without the tie, top button open, slim briefcase in hand, looking at his phone. When he saw me, he said, "You look well." I said, "I look like I just left the hospital." He said, "That's what I meant." I almost laughed. I stood in front of my door, the door I had bought, the door I had paid off, the door I had opened 6,000 mornings, and I knocked on it. Here's the thing I want you to understand about that moment. Not why I knocked instead of using my key. I had my key, of course I had my key. It was my apartment and my name on the deed. I knocked because I wanted him to open the door. I wanted him to be the one to open it. I wanted him to be standing on the inside of something that was mine and have to make the choice to let me in. He opened it in about 8 seconds. He was freshly shaved, gray Henley, dark jeans, clean boots, dressed like a man who lives somewhere and has a reason to be there. He looked at me, then at Marcus, then at me again. He said, "Who is this?" And I want you to mark that question, because it is the moment the story shifts. Not when we came up in the elevator, not when Marcus identified himself. The moment Denton said, "Who is this?" instead of "What's going on?" That was the moment I understood he had still been thinking he could manage this. He thought there was still a version of this where he got to tell me his story, and I absorbed it the way I had always absorbed things. There wasn't. And I want to pause right here for just a second, because I know some of you have a version of this story. Maybe not an apartment, maybe something else, maybe something smaller or something larger, But you know the feeling of being the one who is always fine and having someone mistake that for permission. If that's you, I see you. Hit that like button, subscribe so you're here for the rest of this, and let's keep going, because we are not done. Marcus spoke before I could. He said very evenly that he was representing the property owner of record, Wren Ellen Calloway, and that he was here to review several documents on the premises. Denton's mouth opened. The speech he had prepared, I know he had prepared one, I know him, I know how he thinks. The one about protecting the investment, about being her brother, about what their mother would have wanted. It never got off the ground, because Marcus finished his sentence and left no air in it, and by the time the air came back, I was already reaching into my bag for the folder. Denton tried warmth next. It is always the next move with him. When the first read of the room doesn't go the way he planned, he pivots to warmth, to the brown eyes and the familiar voice and the specific way he has of saying your name when he needs you to remember he loves you. He said, "Wren, hey, you look good. I'm so glad you're okay. I was scared. I want you to know I was really scared. I was just trying to help." He said their mother's name. He said Mom would have wanted someone here. She would have hated the thought of the place sitting empty. He was looking at me the way he looked at me when we were kids, when he'd broken something and needed me to cover it, that particular angle of the head, that slightly open honesty of the face that had worked so many times on so many people. I watched him do it. I let him finish. I did not move my face. And then a voice came from behind him, from further inside the apartment, from the hallway where the bedroom is. A woman's voice, slightly startled. "Denton, I thought you said she wasn't getting out until next week." Denton did not answer. He turned very slightly toward the sound and then back, and in that fraction of a second, something in his posture changed. Not much, just enough. Macy, because that is who it was, the girlfriend who had signed the notarized document as witness, the woman Paulette had seen leaving the building in the evenings, appeared in the hallway in jeans and a sweatshirt with her hair still up from whatever she'd been doing. And she stopped when she saw Marcus. And then she looked at me. And then she looked at Denton. And she did not say anything else. I opened the folder. I placed the county assessor's change of address form on the kitchen counter, my kitchen counter, with the chip in the corner from the time I dropped a cast iron pan my first winter there, and decided to love the chip because it was mine. The form had Denton's signature at the bottom and the date March 14th at the top. I placed the notarized lease document beside it. Then I placed Paulette's log, 22 pages of dated, time-stamped entries in her precise, retired librarian handwriting, noting every sound, every visitor, every piece of mail with his name on it. I smoothed all three down with my palm. I said, "The date on the change of address filing is March 14th. I went to the hospital February 19th. That's 23 days. Denton looked at the documents. He said, "Wren," I said, "hold on." I picked up the change of address form and I pointed to the section where Denton had listed his personal identification for the submission. He had included, as documentation of his family connection to the property, a notarized affidavit describing a gold-toned personal timepiece, engraved on the inner case with the words, D. Calloway, gifted by family, as a family heirloom bequeathed to him by their late father. That watch, the one from the nightstand, the one he put on the day of the funeral and wore every day since. The one I never challenged him on because it was a watch and he was my brother and I was tired and I had always let him have things. He had the engraving done after the funeral. He had submitted the affidavit as evidence of his familial right to be associated with this property. He had been building the groundwork, the watch, the key, the family narrative, the online inquiry 8 days before I went to the hospital, for a long time. Longer than the 6 weeks I was in the hospital. He had been waiting for a window, My getting sick was just the window that opened first. I heard Macy make a small sound behind him. I did not look at her. I looked at my brother, who was looking at the watch on his wrist, and I watched him understand what I had just shown him. He did not have a story for this one. He had stories for everything. He had a story for the change of address filing. He could say he panicked. He'd heard something about people squatting in vacant apartments, and he was just protecting the property. He had a story for staying there. Emergencies. He'd needed a place. He was going to tell me. He was going to pay something. He had a story for the notarized lease. He'd found it online. He thought it would make things official. He was going to explain it. But the watch. The watch with the engraving he'd had done after the funeral. The affidavit he'd filed with the county identifying it as documentation of family connection. That one he had not planned to explain to me, because he had not planned for me to find it. Marcus spoke. He said, very calmly, that the change of address filing predated the adverse possession window Denton would have needed to meet, and that the notarized instrument contained a false attestation, and that the witness signature, he looked at Macy briefly, may place the signatory in a difficult legal position, depending on what she knew at the time of signing. Macy said, very quietly, I didn't know what I was signing. Marcus said, okay. He wrote something in his notepad. He did not editorialize. He did not need to. Denton's collapse was not a breakdown. He didn't flip anything. He didn't raise his voice. What happened was quieter than that, and in some ways harder to watch. The performance ran out of air. The warm eyes, the familiar voice, the prepared explanations, they were still there technically, but they weren't connected to anything. He said, I was drowning, Wren. His voice was flat. I have been drowning for 2 years, and you have always been fine, and I needed something to land on. I looked at him then, really looked at him, and I saw something I did not want to see. My father's face. The particular way our father's face went when he'd been caught in something. The slight turn of the head, the somewhere else eyes. I had watched my father do that. I had absorbed it then, too. I said, I know you were scared, Denton. And I meant it. I meant every word of it. I was scared, too. For 6 weeks. In a hospital bed with a drain tube in my side, wondering what was happening to my home. I was scared, too. He looked at me. I held it for a moment, and then I said, You have until Friday. I picked up my folder. I put it in my bag. I looked at Marcus and nodded. We walked out. Paulette was standing in the hallway the entire time, because of course she was, and she held the elevator without being asked, and we rode down in silence, and in the lobby she squeezed my hand once, and I let her. The natural consequences unfolded without my participation, which is the only satisfying kind. The change of address filing was formally challenged through Marcus's petition and withdrawn within 2 weeks. It went on record as a failed submission. The notarized document was referred to the state bar for review of the notary, who turned out to have a pattern with similar instruments. Denton and Macy were out by Thursday, a day early. I do not know where they went. I did not ask. 2 weeks after that, I received a text from Macy. I didn't know what I was signing. I'm sorry. I read it twice. I put the phone down. I did not respond, and I did not report her. A cousin of mine, the one who had texted me that Denton was keeping an eye on things, called to apologize. She said she should have asked more questions. I said yes. And then I asked about her kids, and we talked for 20 minutes about something else entirely. And that felt right. And I meant that too. 2 other members of the extended family did not call. I noted this and let it sit. I wrote Denton a letter. Not emotional, not the letter I would have written the day I got the text from Paulette about the bags, when I was still 21 days from discharge and running on IV fluids and very old grief. Not that letter. This one was clear and specific. I told him I would not be pursuing criminal charges if the filing remained withdrawn and he stayed away. I told him I hoped he found a way through what he owed that did not require taking from someone else. I told him I was not doing this for him. I told him I was doing it because I was finished carrying things that didn't belong to me. I mailed it certified mail, return receipt. The green card came back signed 12 days later. I filed it in chronological order. It is the last document in the folder. On a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after I came home, I am sitting at my kitchen table. There is tea going cold at my elbow. There is a color-coded to-do list in front of me for a compliance review due Friday. The apartment smells like my tea and my books and the specific order I impose on things, and that smell is the closest thing I know to the word home. I look at the list. I think, without saying it aloud, I think it in the direction of the man from the nightstand, the man who taught me to be quiet by modeling it, who loved me in the direction he knew. I know you didn't think I would, Dad. I know you didn't think I would. I pick up the pen. I start on item 1. If any part of this story stayed with you, if you've ever been the one who was always fine, or the one who built something quietly and had someone mistake the quiet for permission, I hope you know that documentation is its own kind of voice. Leave me a comment telling me what part of this hit you hardest. Like this video if you believe that being organized can be its own kind of power. Subscribe so you're here for the next story, and share it with someone who needs to hear that the folder on your lap can be enough. Thank you for being here. Take care of yourself.